Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is the making of Codename Hurricane Part 3, in which we discuss sound design. This is going to be good. So I'm just going to do this one chronologically, but don't worry, if you're into just the bases, then don't. We'll get there, because the beginning won't take very long. Also, I mean, today's Friday, which normally means this would be time for how to bass, but considering that this is all about sound design for this track, and there's a lot of bass involved, then this will be pretty, I think, applicable. So let's begin. Right off the bat, we got these two hits, which I had mentioned in the first part of making of, are from the Leviathan pack from Black Octopus. They may even be named the same things. Also, I have the first bar or first beat from the drums, which normally this is Superior Drummer. I have it routed out. It's being this is all Superior Drummer stuff. It's being layered with some synthetic kicks, which are also from the Leviathan sound pack. I actually went a huge part into how I arranged these in the mixing, so I guess I won't talk about the drums so much. That was in part 2 of the making of, in case you missed that. And then strings and stuff. So strings and stuff. These are from East West Quantum Leap Symphonic Orchestra, which are here. And I have choirs, which I really didn't use any of. I really stuck just the strings, which we can't hear because the very beginning is actually swells up for a lot of them. And the way that I handle this is that I set the MIDI input port for play, which is 1, and then I made a whole bunch of MIDI outs to control the individual sections of things. And there's a choir that I thought I was going to use, and I'm not using. I don't know what number 4 was. But, yeah. So some of these you see actually says KS master, that means key switch, versus this guy just says sus vibe hard. Otherwise, sustained, vibrato, hard. Yeah. And so that's just one patch, whereas these guys are a whole bunch of patches. And how that works is that these blue thingies, I mean, if you've ever used Contact, this is what this is about. These blue notes, whenever you hit them, indicate a different articulation for the sound. I'm not totally sure. Is it going to tell me which one is what? No, I guess not. I'm not totally sure which one I'm on, and I'm not going to dick with it because I want to keep it the way it is. But basically, I found one that I liked for. I don't remember that being the one that I used. I might have just accidentally changed it. That sounds about right. And then when those strings come in, they're a different string set from the ones that I was using. They're its own string set that was only ever used for this. And now you also see how I kind of offset it. It's because there's a big swell. There's a long attack until the note becomes, the note. So I offset it a bit so that it would sound more in time. The piano, I just used the main MIDI in the actual play module. I'm using, what am I using? I'm using I forgot about this. I'm using 2 pianos. And I'm panning them swapped stereo. So like, you know how when you play a piano, you have like highs on the right and lows on the left. I use 2 pianos and I swapped it around so that it's sort of an even stereo field. That sometimes works. It sometimes worked. Yeah. Now these guys are all being routed to their own inserts. That's the bass. So this guy's being routed into this dude for some reason. I don't really remember why I did that. I guess I just wanted to bust them together, but then I realized I didn't really need to. But they're in there. This guy's being EQ'd. Oh, I know why. This is this is both the high strings. Oh, it's both pianos. Okay, that makes sense. So I put both pianos in here, and then I put this one in there. I still wanted it to have the processing that I put on that piano, but because it's a different piano, I had to EQ it slightly to make it fit better. So then I put that in a separate insert and then route it back into the other one, so that not only would it have the changes I made in this EQ, but it would also have the same general processing that I have with like the compression, the other EQ, the Valhalla, which I use later, and the filter, which I apparently never use, as you can see, because it's off. And then here's all the strings. Literally all the strings. So that's where I guess I kept most of them. I compressed them together just so that they're big and prominent, mostly focusing on shaping the high frequencies, since this is a high frequency instrument. And then it's also got its own little bit of reverb, but it's pretty short. And this I use Valhalla Shimmer. If you've never used Valhalla plugins for your reverb, you should, because damn. In particular, the reverb that I use on the piano, I only use during the drop. That's what this automation clip is here. That says Valhalla Shimmer. It shows up just long enough. And that's what that sounds like. It's also what I use at the very end when the piano fades out. Indeed. So then I have this bass. So what I'm automating here is the pluck about. This guy doesn't really go far or do much. I kind of just had it here to give a little bit of low end filler. It's got some distortion with stereo asymmetry engaged. It's pitched down pretty far. It's made in a square shape using the detune function, because when we use the detune function, it puts it into the square location. It's also a bit of a filter on. I don't know if I'm using the filter, but I'm pretty sure it's just there to keep it at this level. But it's just the basic filter. I changed nothing up here, and I'm just using it. I'm just brought the filter down. Let's look and see if I'm doing anything complicated. I am. So in the unison, I got two up here, and it's up pretty high. It's up rather high, actually. But that's because in the unison pitch window, where we control how much unison we apply on what part, what harmonic individually, there pretty much is no unison on the lower ones, which is where the biggest mess would exist if I did have it that high on all the frequencies. And then I turn it all the way up for the high frequencies, which most of them are being filtered out, or we're not hearing it very often because of the pluck. But here's the cool thing about that. In doing that, and having this big old mess up with the high frequencies, and having the sharp pluck, the sharpness that we're hearing is not necessarily a note. In the higher frequencies, it's not really tonal. But the sharpness makes it sound more metallic, like it's having like a hammer. It's being hammered. So that's kind of cool. And then the unison of the pitch thickness is actually going away really fast. So that's stable. Like right there, it's stable. If this were to come off, that would happen. So this is basically automating down this by this. So it's coming all the way down. Versus staying on. That's what's up with that. Scrape. This is me remembering Skype. I never remember Skype. Then I have this ARP. You saw me turn this automation clip here, and it's labeled Arpeggio Gate Envelope. So in the ARP, I made the ARP by going in the function tab and turning on the arpeggiator. It's on auto sustain, so it's going to ARP these chords 4 times in up and down, or just up rather. And then I'm automating the gate, this knob right here. basically controls the how long each individual note in the arpeggio is played. And then the main automation I'm doing here is on the EQ. The filter, but it is an EQ, and filters and EQ are kind of, they feel the same thing, you know, circles or squares and rectangles. Anyway, automating the filter. I set the width to be down a little bit so it's a bit sharper. There's no resonance. It's keyboard tracking, which means that you can kind of see it happening in the spectrum here. All the bottom fundamentals of each note, even when it goes high, are all exactly the same amplitude. And then as the filter increases or decreases, more harmonics will be introduced for each individual note, as opposed to only being just spectrum based. It's basically note following. We're note following the filter. So here's a good example. See, it starts out being mostly quiet in the higher harmonics. They're still low harmonics, but like the higher than the fundamental tone harmonics, and then they get lower, and then there's a lot. And that's a lot of fun. So it's distorted, it's compressed, reverb, delay, just set up random values. Harmonic use of pitch is set up kind of like the squishy bass pluck. This is mostly because I didn't want the lower frequencies, the harmonics, the fundamental tone of the harmonics to be really screwy, because I'm using the Hertz unit in the mount, which is a bit of a silly, it makes silly sounds. And it's different every time you hit a note. So I want that for the higher frequencies to give it a bit of a sort of a stereo wash, but I wanted the actual main note, the fundamental tone, to be noticeable and obvious. Especially because it spends most of its time being low passed to being just the pretty basic sine wave for most of the time. So these chords that I chose to use are actually the main chords that I made in the B drop. I covered this during the first part of the making of. But I'll talk more about these when I actually get to them, because a big part of how the chords like that sound are determined by the notes you choose to use. And there's lots of theory involved in that, so we'll talk about that. And here's the hats. They're being filter automated. Being my one filter pattern that I'm using throughout the entire track. All the hats are being routed to one channel, and this is the filter that's being used to filter it. Pretty straightforward. And then this guy. I must be turned up too high in here. Noticeably distorting. Yeah. Anyway, this is the main bass. We're actually hearing it distorting more because I have my mic on and another FL running, and then they add up and to exploit as distortion. So that's that. I mean, it is distorting. I covered that in mixing and mastering. Mixing and mastering. I can speak, I promise, because I do use words. Well, let's talk about layer bass. So I actually literally made a layer, and I set it to play these 4 harmonic patches, which I always do this. There we go. All right. These are the 4 patches. So in the story of how this track was, made, it involved a lot of taking influence from AU5 stuff. And AU5 has influence from a lot of other things, but that whole style, a lot of it seemed to focus on this idea of layering. And I didn't really learn the point of layering. I kind of just decided, okay, layering, so I'm just gonna layer stuff, and I laid a whole bunch of bases. So it's not necessarily how one would go about doing what I thought I was doing, but it was something that happened and something that worked out pretty good. So there were some overarching ideas about why I did these particular sounds this way, but largely no. I just kind of made a whole bunch of stuff and put them together. Let's talk about what the individual thingies are. So this guy, let's do this. solo them individually. So this guy's being controlled by the main filter in part A and B. Okay, so let's take a look. This is something I haven't looked at. I probably should have got it before I did this, but it was whatever. It's got some unison with this big unison change window in here with not so much on the low end. The low end is being kind of left alone on the unison. So that means the lowest note is pretty much just the one note as opposed to the Reezy kind of thing. Use the pitch thickness cancels itself, so if it's just on the A part. So that's just the A part, and this is just the B part. So obviously in the B part, I have left the low end unison on. That's what happened there. So I used A and B kind of together to give a balanced movement, because like here it's stable, here it has lots of movement. And together we have lots of movement, but because we have that little bit of stability, there's always at least some stable nature in there. So this one I kept on average precision. I really only ever change the precision when I think about it, which is usually when I'm doing resampling. We'll get to that later. So we got this one's on uniform. It's also on uniform. This one I must have changed to local EQ a little bit. Yep, I increased the low end presence on the lowest harmonic on part B because again, part A didn't have a lot of movement, but part B did. So I wanted the part B to have all the movement and had it be noticeable. And basically drive it into distortion harder than the fundamental tone in part B. And I did. And then I compressed it, and then EQ'd it, and then compressed it again. Mostly to ensure the low end is present the whole time. The highs and the lows pretty much, or the mids and highs, didn't really go anywhere. Although the highs are high enough that I increased it a little bit. So I brought the highs up too, just to give it increased presence. And then I left the basic compression on the top so that this movement is being forced upon it, which I guess I thought must have sounded good. And I guess I think it does too, because I am used to the sound. Indeed. So that's the first guy. There's not really a huge amount happening outside the normer. The normer and the normal. Here's harmony number 3. That's interesting. So harmony number 3, I took out from Harvard 2's mixer insert, kind of like the piano. I dropped it out into another insert and then routed it also to that one. This makes sense because I probably cloned it. And then made changes to. Yeah, so I probably cloned this from the other one and then made changes to some various parameters. So like for this one, for example, the other one was in harmonic detune position 1, which meant that it was all the sol wave position. And then this one, it's in 2 and then 4. And this is largely the same thing. I got the low end difference. And then on A, it's more or less the same. Then it comes down as fast. So that's the stable one. Also, you can hear that it switched stereo fields. And that was on purpose. I did that in the mixer insert. You can swap stereo in the mixer insert. You can see this engaged here. That's the swap stereo button. And then I made a detune 2 and I put it into square position, which meant that it moved the harmonics into square position and then it went and removed all the even harmonics anyway. So that means it's extra spacey. And then over here I made the detune 4. Which sounds extra movementy with the harmonic unison settings, which are exactly the same as the other patch that we're just using. So this is pretty much this is how the idea of layering began in my mind. Is that I made one sound and then I kind of made subtle changes to it, which in Harmor when you make subtle changes, it has a huge impact on the sound, and then you layer them together, and because they're used to be the same sound, they should sort of work together, and that's more or less what happened. So then I like the piano, I broke this out to another mixer insert, and then I made my color changes with the EQ, and then I put that in the same processing, which is the EQ and the compressor. So the two of these together sound like this. Yeah. So let's see. Here's the third guy. Also modulating the filter cutoff. So this is just a one parter, only just A. It's got unison. It's got prism. Although not a lot of prism, but it apparently shuts off really fast. And the phaser is interesting. So what I've done, okay, so this is one of the phase verbs. This is phase verb 16. And it's heavily distorted, but I feel like I did something to this. I got a patcher. What's going on with the patcher? Okay, so I got a wave shaper. So I made this one mostly high frequency noise to kind of keep it in line. So before we talk about the patcher, let's look more about what's happening in the harmor. So in the harmor, we've got harmonic use and pitch, and it's got this shape, which I use a lot. I use shape a lot in the past. So what this is that it's got the regular unison amount on the lowest frequency on the fundamentals, and then on the mids it's a lower, and then it gets progressively higher, which gives us the sort of squelchy sound if we use that a lot. Phaser width is modulation Y mapping, which I absolutely did not move at all, because the lowest phaser width gets us this sort of vertical on-off position, which is nice. Local EQ, I kind of dicked around with the mids and the lows, which gives us that kind of bell-ish sort of sound because we're not a square right now. Yeah, relatively high phase, higher-ish pitch on the unison. That's the unison window. Local EQ is changed. Phaser shape is a custom shape, which is a lot of fun. I kind of just messed around with this until I got something that I liked. There wasn't really a big reason for it. And then I distorted it. And then it's going in the patcher. This is what the sound sounds like without all of the mixer effects. That's what it sounds like. And that turned into this. So first the EQ, which it's being high pass and a little bit changed in the high frequencies, just to kind of get it mostly. I made the decision. I can't remember this. I made the decision to make this one mostly like effect and like background texture. It's kind of what this guy's for. Chorus to facilitate this, just to screw with the pitches more, and then the wave shaper. This particular shape where we're bringing down, we have the 0 level on the very bottom, but it's extended out beyond the actual 0 position. Creates this sort of dry sounding thing, especially when we're using only high frequencies on the distortion. There's no low frequencies going into the wave shaper from here. And the EQ changes a bit because I'm sure it made it pretty harsh. And then it's being it's being compressed where there are actually low frequencies out of there after this. As a result of the distortion. And so we're pumping that up. But it's still pretty spread out between the actual lowest of the lows and the high mids. Or the low mids, rather. Low mids. Mids and highs. This is also where I did stereo separation. I'm monoed out where the low end would be, and then the mids and highs are spread out a little bit. And the actual highs are monoed-ish. Lows are monoed completely, and the highs are monoed-ish. I find that you have more impact on your stereo field when the mids are the things that are the most stereo. I mean, the high frequencies are going to be the most stereo anyway, even when I do bring them in this low, just because of how I perceive them. But if we force a lot of stereo separation on the mids, it feels more stereo, especially in headphones. It makes it feel like, wow, this is really stereo. Sounds not really loud enough to be affected by the compression on the master limiter. And that goes out, and then here's the EQ. This EQ I probably put in after I made the sound, and I have to put them all together to kind of like shape it against the rest of the sounds. And then we have the other phase verb 16. Now, this is the one that we actually hear the most in the all four of them together. So this is actually going into the same mixer insert as the other phase verb 16. And it looks to be largely the same. There's less unison and less phase change. The phaser shape is a bit different, and the width remains the same. The prism amount is exactly the same. So the prism setting where it shuts off real quick is the same. The unison pitch is the same setting. The local EQ is the same setting. The phaser shape is a bit different, and the phaser position is a bit different. And it's creating that business. And of course, I'm controlling the cutoff. Then all four of these together. Yeah, so the two of them are one's in the main channel, its own channel, and then its clone is in another mixer insert that goes to the channel, and then two of them are in one channel itself. Where I apparently decided that I didn't need to split it. Okay, so this makes sense. So there were low frequencies in the Maximus because I actually I split out the original signal. So there's high frequency texture happening, but then also some of the original signals going in here too. You see, I actually turned it down a little bit and then turned it down the other one a little bit, so it's balanced. It's somewhat balanced. Basically, after the first two harmers, I didn't really need to worry about low end. Like I did not need to add more low end. The pretty much after that, because like really bass layering is less about the actual bass frequencies and more about mids and highs, like what they're doing and how they're acting and what the textures are. Like, I mean, you do layer a little bit of the low end, and that's how you get like the Reese stuff, because you get the phase cancellation when it, wobbles together. But that's not a lot of stuff happening. That's not a lot. And if you try to make it a lot, it will not, it'll probably end badly. So that's this main bass. I call it the main bass because it's the one that I use in the B part of the drop as well. And it has just the one automation clip, which is controlling the filters for every single one of these four that's here. Let's really just stop doing that. And then we have this next part. Now, I pointed this out in the last one, but I want to point it out again. This piano is very expressive. So like it has a lot of velocity sensitivity. Which is why we get this nice, calm, it's cool. And then it can build up. That's a lot of fun. Like that's not just increasing the volume of the piano. It's actually different like quality and texture per velocity, which is the difference between using a very fakey sounding piano and using that piano. But also, like I said, there are other pianos you can get that will probably get you this result that don't involve what this used, because it's very expensive. So I have risers. Now these risers are controlling mostly up here. If you remember some of my older FLPs, this is actually pretty common. So these are two different risers. This is a Harmer riser and this guy, and then a FM riser. This is actually this is just an FM patch that I made a long time ago. I made this for Dreams of Bass. This is like the first EDM track I ever made. It's not really the first EDM track, but it's the first one people noticed. And this one, I basically just increased it in pitch. That's why you see in the riser channels, you see these two notes. One's a really low note, and then one is a very high note that is a slide note. So then the pitch just increases over those two notes over the whole time. And these two volume clips here control the mixer inserts that are being that I'm mixing these two guys, and they mostly only come in during like the halfway point. I probably originally tried to make them come in through the whole thing, but it sounded like too much. That's what that guy sounds like, but I have Valhalla Shimmer on it. That's all I got on that. And on the Harmer one, I got a delay and a little bit of EQ to get rid of bass, I guess, because that's bass. That's what's happening. That's why that's what it's doing. I have to imagine that's why I did it. I didn't do that to add more bass. That'd be weird. So this FM lead is a lot of fun because what's happening is that I wanted the qualities of like the kind of I made this when I was first experimenting with FM. So I wanted like the qualities of like the vocally nature of FM, but I wanted a lead. Now, I'm not automating these particular frequencies. I'm gonna copy this value. Pitch value, copy this value. Now, I remember I had LFOs on some of these. Yeah, so I have an LFO on the modulation of operator 2, modulation input, that is. So operator 3 is modulating operator 2, and this LFO is controlling that. And I have an LFO on operator 1, and presumably 4. Nope. Operator 1. So the operator 1 and 2 have different LFOs engaged. So that's why there's always this movement. There's a lot of movement involved there. I believe the FLP of Dreams of Bass is available. It might even be free. You can try and find the video on my channel. It's way back there. It's called Dreams of Bass, where you can actually get this patch and have a look at it. So I basically just dropped this in here. I didn't make any alterations to it. And I see 4. I made 4 a different waveform, and then I also made it a different pitch, which probably adds to the movement. And by probably, I mean definitely, because that's what happens when you add two things together that are different pitches. Indeed. And so we also heard a little bit of aliasing, which is nice, when it got to be the particularly high frequencies. So let's look at just this guy with Valhalla Shimmer off. That like radio fuzz you're hearing right there, that's aliasing. And that's when we're using frequencies that are way too high. What do we mean by too high? Well, this track is being made in 44.1 kilohertz, which means that the highest frequency it can output is 22.05 kilohertz. And if you go higher than that, instead of it just like stopping and you won't be able to hear it, it reverses and goes lower. That's what aliasing means. And you can solve this through resampling. And so when you are on a plugin and you see things like, oh, oversampling and stuff like that, that's what that means. You turn on oversampling and it won't do that anymore. And then FL has its own main sampling as well. Where would it be? It's here. I have it on 2-point linear, which is actually kind of bad because it means that when I render it and I don't have it on linear, it's gonna change how the song sounds. I usually have it on more than that, but when I need to save CPU, I turn it on to 2-point because it does, you know, we're using more CPU if you do live 512-point sync resampling, which again only really has a use if you have sounds that have more like higher frequencies than 22.05 kilohertz. However, that doesn't affect Citrus because Citrus's aliasing is a result of synthesis, and often sometimes is necessary for a particular kind of sound, especially in the FM world where high frequencies are kind of its thing, and often very hard to avoid. So it has its own sampling or oversampling, and it also has a render version as well. Like draft, like what we're hearing now, we hear it, and then it has oversampling for rendering as well. So it means when it renders, it's not going to do that, which I guess is kind of interesting. It's kind of hard to notice anyway because I'm using a huge amount of reverb. But yeah, that's if you ever wanted to get rid of it and you couldn't, that's why. Because you gotta do it within Citrus's own thing. Most things have their own oversampling for this exact reason. That's what it's for, to avoid aliasing. Sometimes I like aliasing, sometimes I don't. So now the harmonizer. Listen to this guy. Yes, so what I did with this guy is I automated the phaser speed that has a custom shape. It's basically the shape that I had done, and then I made 2 of it in the same shape. Because the highest speed of the phaser's regular period was too slow for me, so I wanted to double it. So I made the shape basically itself 2 shapes. And I'm also automating the prism on multiplier mode, which is, it gets huge, large. So phaser width, phaser offset, and prism amount. So not only am I automating the phaser width. Am I not changing? Oh yeah, that's the speed. Offset speed. So that's this guy. And then I'm also modulating the width just to give it crazier modulation. And then I'm also automating the prism from lowest position to highest position, which we don't even really hear any of this until it starts to get louder here. Or 49. I must have moved them. Yeah, so this doesn't get loud until halfway through, so we're kind of missing a lot of the more interesting sort of automation. But I did that because after I made them, I always make my risers for 16 bars. I do that because that's usually how long the rise section is. In fact, this time was probably the first time that I ever encountered a section where I'm like, you know something, I really only want the rise to show up for 8 bars because I really want like the piano and the ARP and the stuff by itself that could be like. Be really happy, which I muted it in the playlist. Yeah, so those are the risers. And then there's the piano stab. And now we have the first main bass and the drop. First drop bass. We already did a main bass. This is the first drop bass. So it's actually a first drop bass and a chord. So this is Phase Worm 19. I mentioned this a lot. Am I automating that? I mean, I am, but not yet. I love this sound. I use it a lot. So let's get into what this is. So I got my three voice unison, which is a bit different from usual. The phase is dead center. The pitch is up a little bit. Let's go into the drop down menu to see what we're changing. Local EQ is a bit weird. I knew that I kind of wanted that sort of bell-ish sound. And I keep mentioning this bell-ish sound. And that bell-ish sound is the result of a sort of peaky presence in low mid frequencies, getting rid of some other lower mid frequencies. With that kind of isolation creates this sort of bell sound. That's what happens when you make a bunch of mid frequencies really loud into the distortion. Now, what I mean by really loud, I mean disproportionately loud in comparison to things like the rest of the frequencies. Because as well, if they are all the same level of loudness going into the distortion, then they'll still sound the same, it'll just be more distorted. I am distorting it. So that's that. And then I increased a bit of the higher frequencies because it probably got diminished in the face of having a higher lower and mids like that. And the harmonic use and pitch is just a bit weird. I didn't really have a logical reason for doing this, but I decided I like to do it anyway, so I did. It's being distorted with the hill shape, which is important because this adds some of the rhythm back. I don't really mean rhythm. I mean like the saw wave feel of this back when I'm using the square wave position, which I am with detune, and also a little bit of removing harmonics through the square formation up on the timbre, which means that we're very sparse in terms of the harmonic precision. And without distortion, this is what this sounds like. with distortion, like we get some of the buzz back as that's more characteristic of of a saw wave. And for most bass sounds, the same, like if like that sound, if I were to make it versus just a plain old saw and a plain old square, the saw would actually sound an octave lower than the square. And this is not because it is lower, because it still has the same fundamental frequency. It's because of the interaction between how many harmonics there are in the sound. And a square position with a detune and also the timbre means that you have basically half as many harmonics active than you did when you had a square or a saw. So this means it sounds like there's less happening, which somehow translates to being a higher pitch. So Hill kind of brings that back a little bit in the way that it shapes the sound and the distortion. What else am I doing? So the phaser is pretty much the main modulation source for the sound. Now what's happening here is weird blurriness happening is that I have the phaser mask set up with this shape engaged here. So basically this means that these positions where it goes all the way down or like a little bit down are where the sound is not going to be affected by the phaser. Also I have harmonic protection on a little bit. So like a little bit of the lowest fundamental tone is going to be phased off a little bit. You can kind of see it happening, but it'll be there. It'll still be there, like in some capacity. So if I move this around. Yeah. So this curvature also is a result of setting it up to be hertz, because you can also do octave, which is more of a straight thing, but it's the hertz business. And so then it's being distorted, then it's being EQ'd, and then it's going into the side chaining, and it's going in the master. Pretty much every synth is going somehow into the side chaining into the master, which is something that I discussed during the mix and master. Mix and master making of, which is part 2, which exists. If you haven't seen that yet. So chords. Since we're going to talk about that, let's actually go to the second drop, because like I said, making the chords is just as much about the actual note choice as it is about the sound itself. So this may or may not be based on the subtime chords. I'm pretty sure it probably is. So I have Valhalla Room on it, which is another bitchin' reverb plugin. And then it's being EQ'd. We don't really need bass on the chord. So let's see, what have I got? What do I got? So here, yeah, so this is the sometime chord. This is, at least it was based on it. This is the unison pitch window that I made out of that. Basically meaning that there's no low or high frequency, but there's a bit of mid presence on what the unison is doing. It's distorted pretty epically, and this asymmetry is engaged pretty high. And now what the asymmetry does is that it changes how the distortion is applied to the sound on the negative versus positive polarity of the period of the waveform. So like a sine wave goes up and then it goes down, the portion of the waveform on below is going to have like distortion applied differently on it than it does on the top. So that's what I mean by that. I discussed this in the FL Basic tutorial that covers the wave shaper, because you can do that in the wave shaper. And this mode with the asymmetry and harmor, the top position is mono, and then the bottom is pretty much the same thing, only the difference is applied in stereo, which can be cool sometimes. Sometimes. Haha. Yes. Harmonizer is engaged, which is giving us a sort of organish feel. This is the default harmonizer. I did not change anything in terms of like what steps or whatever. It's basically just putting them up in an octave orientation. Yep, so I didn't change a lot. I probably turned the unison down a little bit, and not a lot is happening in the actual sound. The biggest change in the sound is more or less the result of the reverb being applied to it, and then it's being sidechained. Let's talk about the actual chords. So the tonic of the song is E. It's like that is an E minor. Now, let's talk about what I mean by how the chords will sound different depending on what notes you use. So like, that sounds pretty like solid, nice chord. If I got rid of the minor, which is what this G is up here, now it sounds cleaner. It has less activity. It's more solid. If I just did an octave, it's almost impossible to tell that there's more than one note. So the quality of the interaction between the notes is the result of basically either being major or minor, or if you ever use a third. And most of these are 3-note chords or 4-note chords. And this guy is B major chord. I just did not have B in there for some reason. I could just hear Sean Law watching this and telling me, Steven, why didn't you merge the notes? I could have. Control G does that, but I didn't. And largely it's because I didn't think about it. And he's going, God damn it, Steve. I guarantee you that's what he's thinking. So that's, those are the chords. And then, because remember, I made this part first. I made this drop first, and then I integrated those elements into this. And part of that meant putting chords on stuff. Like that. So this guy's fun. Sounds like something out of Massive, doesn't it? So the main modulation for this, this is kind of like like a laserish sort of thing, only instead of using the pitch to swing around the frequencies, I'm using the harmonic detune function, which you can see pretty clearly in the spectrum of the harmony here, where the bottom note isn't going anywhere at all, but the rest of the harmonics are moving around in space a lot. And I'm basically automating through the regular 1 to the highest of 16 harmonic displacement, harmonic detune movement change area thing. Let's see. So what else we got going on? So the unison is coming down hard. What is that? What is causing that change? It's probably the prism. Nope. It's not the unison, because the unison comes down, but does it come down all the way? It does come down all the way. This is very interesting. Not override generic link, copy value. Oh, it's probably in B. Ha! So there was a B part in there. All right, so in the B part, this guy's a bit weird. So I set up the square position of the timbre. I obviously changed the local EQ a bit, and I got rid of the bass. So that's what I did. So this guy doesn't have any low harmonic at all. So it's pretty much as if I am just changing the pitch when I do the detune movement like that. The prism is on. It turns off pretty quickly. When I go to the envelope of a parameter like this, it modifies down to the center position like that, because prism is a 100 to negative 100 thing, which means that off is center. Local EQ, like I said, the unison is actually more or less off. That means I do something interesting. It doesn't at all. Why did I do that? That's weird. I guess I didn't like the unison being on. Yeah, I still have 9 voices, which most of the time when I see that, it means that I went to something like the prism amount, and then I went to unison index mapping and I changed it, but the unison index mapping has not been changed by anything. So I just had 9 voices on for more or less no reason. That combined with part A. So that's part A by itself. And it's got a little bit of unison engaged, but again, it turns off really fast. This boink. Which is why we get that consistent sound when I hold a note. So right in the beginning, we get sort of a sharp sort of hit as a result of the prism and the unison both coming down to 0. Now, you might be thinking, well, it doesn't down to 0 just mean that it's basically just a saw wave at this point, and it doesn't really sound like a saw wave. Why is that? Well, because the prism and the unison both basically mean that you can even see it in the harmor that certain harmonics change, or their pitches are changed. Which you're thinking, okay, cool, it changed the pitches, but then it changed it back, so that means that it should be right. It should be fine. It should be the same as a saw wave. Except that what's happening is that because the pitches were changed, that meant those harmonics oscillated their period, their full wavelength, faster or slower, depending on what harmonic, than it would have originally, which meant that when it all comes back down to the same pitch, it does not mean they all came back to the same phase. And that's why when nothing is moving, it still sounds way different than your original saw wave, like formation at a harmor. Prism amount, you use the pitch thickness. Harmonic, you use the pitch. So pretty standard stuff, just with the idea that I'm automating. I have created an automation clip that's controlling this detune all up in here. So I am compressing it, and I'm running it through the saturation ceiling to basically kind of give it more sharpness. It's not being compressed at all by the master, it's being just thresholded up with the saturation. And then most of the frequencies are being pre-gained a bit higher to get the 0 dB. You get a nice even sound, and then the lows are being mono, the mids are being stereo, and the highs are being more stereo. There's still plenty amount of stereo happening in this sound because through the unison. And distortion isn't being asymmetrical, so it means we're not getting a lot of stereo out of that, but we could. We just didn't. And then we hit this chorus, which is on, but the wet is off. And this is because later in the song, I automate chorus. I automate the wet value. Just not right there. This is the main bass, the main layer bass. And we get the first resampled sound, which is this guy. Now, this is where stuff gets a little embarrassing because, like I said, I made the B drop first. Made this guy first. I made that first, and when I did, I said, okay, I made that, then I made the intro, and I'm like, cool, now I gotta make a drop, which is like the opposite of how I make all my songs. And so I was like, cool, I need basses. I didn't really have, I made the layer bass for the B drop, but I also made some of the other basses that were in here that I used in here, but I still was like lacking things. And I knew that I wanted some sort of crazy sounding like bass design, but I wasn't having a good time coming up with anything new. So what I did was I went into Slice Beats, and like found a sound that I made for something completely unrelated. Like I don't even know what I made that for. And then I clicked and drag, put it in here, and then I found one that was like the right key, which is pretty common because I did this in E. And like when I test things, I usually do it in E. So it wasn't that hard to find something in key. And that's more or less how I found this sound. And now, the unfortunate part of that means that I don't really know how I made that sound. I can kind of guess how I made that sound. It's actually pretty clear. This one sounds a lot like one of the filter basses that's being resampled, and you can clearly hear the resampling artifacts from Harmer, that sort of watery, weird artifact, like low fineness. That's sort of a resampling problem. And like I did try to find what like project this was from, what like when I made it, like I cross-referenced times of creation and all that stuff. But the thing is though, is I don't usually save projects for sounds that I don't use. Which could be bad, like in this example, but yeah. This one was also a filter-based one. That was more clearly, obviously, the filter-based one. This one was a bit changed up a bit. This guy, I originally made from a drum and bass track. Like, it's odd how the difference between 174 and 140 kind of, you can still syncopate with it a little bit. I did change the time slightly. And I also changed the time again from when I used it. There. And it just happened to be a miracle that was like the major 7 of the key, which fit with that kind of stuff. Yeah. So the resampled basses are a bit unfortunate. And like I mentioned before, this is I can give clues as to how I made it. Like I said, these guys are the filter bass, and I'm pretty sure I did a how to bass on that at one point. I've done enough tutorials on how I do the Harmar resampling that if you really wanted to figure out how to make those sounds really hardcore, you should be able to. And later I'll link up some stuff on like Facebook specifically about how to do those. because I do feel a little bit bad that I can't just like show it to you. But again, you're not going to get the FLP, so it's less stupid than like if I had actually given you this FLP and then you found these. It's kind of like, cool, how did I make this? There's no evidence anywhere that this was even made in this project. Great, cool, thanks, good job. Nonetheless, these are going into a channel, it's being EQ'd, and then it's going into the side chaining, and it's going out the master. Then we have this guy. That's weird. I must have used a different one later. So this is a an FM modulated harmor bass. I'm pretty sure. Actually, I remember this one. So this is actually phase warp 19, changed slightly, and like I increased the number of voices of unison. I increased the unison. I believe I changed the unison with pitch. No, I did not change it. This is the same one. And then the pitch thickness, I let down a little bit longer than usual. And then I also have opposite keyboard tracking on. Do I have opposite keyboard tracking on for the other one? It might have been important. I do. So okay, opposite keyboard tracking means that when the note is played and it moves around, like when the pitch itself moves around, the position of the phaser moves around with it. And by normal keyboard tracking will mean that if it moves up, the thing moves up and everything moves up together. So that like if you have a quality of a sound at one note, you have the higher quality of that sound at the other note, as opposed to having like lower frequencies still doing whatever they're doing. And opposite mode, this means that when you like pitch down, the phaser moves up, and it sounds kind of interesting, which is why I did that. Where you at? Which is what this odd shape is a result of. And you can even see it because like it goes down and then the phaser goes up, and it's kind of weird. And then I also have just one of my basic FM patches. This guy, it's got the higher harmonic. It's modulating a sine wave by a triangle, and then it's being modulated again by a triangle. Almost a saw wave. It's still got triangle qualities, and then it's being modulated by an offset sine wave, and then that's being modulated by a sine wave, and then it's going out. And then it's also having a reinforcement sine wave so that the bass is pretty consistent. I believe the volume is being modulated on this. It is. So I do that because against the modulation of the output operator, when you're at your highest modulation amount, the sound is least like a sine wave as possible. Like it's as the least amount of original sine wave in there. So this means that the bass is a bit diminished. So when that's happening, I modulate on just a regular sine wave, just the volume just turned on, and that goes output. So that basically, no matter what level the FM modulation is at, the sine reinforcement, like the amount of actual low end bass is the same, which is important. So yeah, I also have Y modulation, which must be this guy. Yes. So this extra sine wave that comes in here, I turn on with the Y character. This is your Y character. This is a really old FM patch that I made. But when I'm using it basically as a vocal modulator because it's being vocoded. I don't know why I'm routing it into this guy by itself, but I guess I did that because I had some other modulator that I wanted to use, but then I decided not to. And this is the phase where it's being compressed to hell and it's being modulated or EQ'd. The compression is mostly to even out the frequency just so that there's enough for the modulator to actually use. And then Vocodex. 92 voices. That's a lot of voices. And even 2 unison. That's incredible. That's more than I usually do. What am I automating? I'm automating mostly just the FM parameters. So I'm only modulating the FM X and Y for the Vocodex. I got a little bit of a low amount of bandwidth. You can tell because you can kind of see space in between the bands. Like you can see the space there. I turned the main pitch down pretty hard. I probably changed modulator pitch shift. Yep, kind of a lot. I don't remember why I did that, but I did do that, and that caused this to happen that way. Yeah. I turned off minimum times. I turned off draft also. I turned off minimum times, turn off the attack, the hold's a bit lower, and so is the release. So it kind of follows closely. Normally I wouldn't do that. I would actually keep the release pretty high, but that's just for things that are literally vocals. If I'm using a synth, I don't really have to worry about the warbly kind of thing that happens when you do that as a result. I also am using pretty high saturation, like a higher saturation. This is called the bandwidth band multiplier, modulator bandwidth multiplier. But really what this results in is saturation, because if I have low amounts, it adheres as much as it can to the original EQ profile of the modulator, which has more of an impact when it's an actual vocal than something that's pretty smooth, like a synth, like this FM patch. About doing anything panning. I don't think I messed with the band distribution. I didn't mess with a lot. So then up in here, what I'm doing is I turned the carrier mix all the way up, but the carrier by default has a low pass on it. This is so that I can bypass the low end of the vocoding so that it comes out the basic synth quality. Oh. I got this completely backwards. Or did I? Hold on. Carrier is insert 32. That's definitely the harmer. Like that is 100% the harmer. 38. Oh my God. I got this backwards. So, all right. I made the FM patch. I'm so confused. I'm not that confused, but I did not think I did this. That's the wrong phase word. That's why I'm stupid. Okay. 32. Yep. All right. 32 is the carrier. 33 is the modulator. I thought for a second that I switched it around and that I modulated the FM patch by the hardware, which I've done sometimes, but that's not what I did this time. The reason why I thought that is because it sounded particularly odd when I did that, but that's the result of the reverse keyboard tracking phaser. That's what that bass sounds like in reference compared to the other bass. I mostly, like when I make carriers like this, I'll make an original that kind of, I think I know what I want it to sound like, and then I put the vocoding on it, and then I'll change the carrier with the vocoding on it. So that how I know how it'll change, the sound. And the point I was trying to make is that I have this low pass way down here, so that I had the bass coming through, and then in the main band gain multiplier, Jesus, I turned off pretty much everything. I'm a little careful about how I move some of the lowest ones, because sometimes vocodecs will bug out, but I'm pretty sure they fixed that problem a long time ago, but it's still kind of present in my mind, so I don't mess with it. Yeah. I engaged unison a little bit to sort of spread out the frequencies, but I didn't engage the stereo nature of it. Mostly because the carrier has enough stereo going on that I didn't really need to. Now, in terms of note values, the main, that's the FM patch. The main bass, the note that we're following is going to be the carrier, so then here's the carrier. But then you don't really need to have the same note quality when we're doing with the modulator. Because remember, the modulator is just an application of EQ analysis on top of the carrier. Sometimes it sounds better if it does follow the note, but most of the time I don't really care. So I modulate X and Y as I see fit. And it can be fun. Well, that was this guy over here. Yeah. And then we have phase verb 19 again. This is the original phase verb, except this time I am modulating the phaser width. It's not the phaser. Yeah. And this is what it looks like when you modulate the phaser width. And this is one of the resample bases. It's in 39, it's being EQ'd, and then it's going out to the master. It's going out to the side chain, which is going out to the master. And for all intents and purposes, the side chain is the master. It's not at all. I shouldn't have said that. It goes out to the side chain. I need to specify that's what's happening. And this guy. This is just a sound that I got out of one of my presets that I wanted to use a laser for. This is one of the original phase verbs. I don't remember why I called it this because I did not use the phaser to make it. The phase verbs generally denote that it's a sort of a rhythmic sound that I created using the phaser. However, some of the older phase verbs, like the ones that aren't numbered, like this guy, the rhythmic quality was the result of using the phase detune or the harmonic detune, because it's not literally phase detune. I don't really know why I call it a phase verb. The first time I made any of those, I used it in Resolve. That's how old these are. That's how old those presets are. But I just wanted to make a laser, so I did. I compressed it, not pretty heavily. EQ'd it off to the sidechain, off to the master. See, I specified that time; it wasn't that bad. And we got this bass again from here. I am busy, thank you. And this dude kind of just is the same deal. And then we have this. This is the drum and bass one that I resampled. Coupled with this chord here. So in the progression of the chords. So it's that dude. And what is this chord? This looks like an inversion of some kind. So we got a B. Well, it's got a minor 7 in it. Yeah, so I'm gonna call this a minor. Okay, so I see, I put the 5 down there. And this particular portion of the bass happened to fit that chord. Then we come back to having the tonic in there, and then this guy is the second layer bass. Now, this one was a little bit more straightforward than the 4-layered bass I created up there. I might have actually made this one first. I mean, no, I didn't, because you can see the layers numbered, but this guy, 24, 23, 22, 23, so 22, 23, 24. I guess I must have made this one first. And this is, again, another phase verb. But here's the thing about the phase verbs, is that some of them are created in such a way that if you move the pitch or the phase of the unison at all, it will wildly change the sound. I'm sure I made larger changes to these as well. So let's check out what's up. This is the first guy. This is going into number 22. So this one is a result of the phaser. The width, this vertical quality we get when we turn the width all the way down on any of the business. This crap that you see happening when I turn down the harmonic mode happens because the harmonic mode is sensitive to the movement and position of the prism and the unison. But I'm not messing with that for the song. That'll be a big important one when we go over Remember off my EP. Although I had done a how to bass for that bass. So the prism amount is being automated down. I think the unison is as well. Yeah, because I basically want the rhythmic hits to be the same. They don't change over time, which they would if I let the unison go. This one set the unison 9. The panic's pretty high, phase is pretty low, pitch is pretty low. Unison pitch window is a bit crazy, as some of the phase verbs are. This is phase verb 14. It's set to the second position of the unison detune, which is the harmonic detune. Can't remember all my terminology, which means it makes it a bit of a square. The prism, I believe, is the default prism shape. Yeah, because I had to mess with it. The phaser width, phaser amount, phaser, that's prism amount. Unison pitch thickness, automates down, we covered that. Phaser width is Y mapping, which I did not change at all. I didn't use that automating at all. And then I went to number 2, which is a saw wave version, saw wave version, which means, this harmonic detune 1 as opposed to 2. Is the phaser shape different? Nope, same phaser shape, same phaser speed. The unison is a bit higher. The prism I think is opposite. Yep, the prism is opposite. Prism amount automates down the same speed. Unison pitch thickness automates down the same speed. Unison pitch window I think is the same. Yep. This is the difference in pitch and phase, like I said, and then unison detune is mounted down to 1. And then here's another one. This is one where I turn the mix of the phaser down a bit. Pitch, the prism is back. Prism amount automates down the same speed. Unison pitch thickness automates down, I think, at a different speed. I believe that's a bit different than the originals. Nope, same speed. Okay. Unison pitch window is the same. Phaser shape is the same. Phaser width, still the automation that I didn't use. And then the pitch and the phase, I think, is a bit different. Oh, yes. Much different. Like, I'm gonna clone one of these guys. Let's clone this guy. Now watch what happens when I just mess around with the phase and the pitch of the unison. So when I'm calibrating the sound and I'm making all these different sounds and I'm thinking, oh wow, this is a bit different, then I figured, okay, if they're all fundamentally the same sound, but that is what causes the difference, I wonder what happened if I layered a whole bunch of them together. The answer is that they still kind of largely sound the same, but there's still subtle differences, which is kind of the objective when we do layering of any kind, is that we want to make a whole bunch of stuff sound like one thing, but to make that one thing have quote unquote better qualities than just literally just the one version of the thing. Mixing wise, they all have slightly different EQ positions. And as well, some of them are swapped stereo so that they kind of balance out. That's another benefit of doing layering of these kinds of basses with Harmor, is that sometimes the Harmor will be weighted weirdly in the stereo field. So if I could just clone it, change it a little bit, and then swap the stereo, that's kind of even. And you also have like subtle differences in your stereo field. So that's handy that way. That's a pretty good sound like that. So I layered that piano stab in here, and I got the Valhalla shimmer to come back in. Throughout all of this, I also had this ARP happening. I pretty much keep it tonic the whole way through, except for that one chord transition with the minor 7 involved, or the major 7 involved. Now this guy is this bass again. And it's just 1 1 5 1. I can't sing, so I don't. The weird automation going on. Let me get this bass again. Whenever you hear these basses, they're largely just the one sample that I use to cut up in different ways throughout the entirety of the song. And this is that laser wurb. I should probably talk about how I made this sound anyway. So harmonic use and pitch is a bit crazy. Phaser shape is also a little crazy. The filter shape I don't use ever, so it doesn't matter. Prism is automated down even though it's barely on. Unison pitch thickness is modulated down, and this is because, I mean, the wobble quality is something that comes from the harmonic detune being what it is. And if this weren't on, it'd be a bit weird. But since it is on, the wobbles are consistent. The Reese quality of it. Yeah, the unison is 2 voices. It's distorted by Cube. Cube was a distortion I used a lot in my early Harmor days. It's not really a thing I use a lot anymore for reasons. It's compressed. It's compressed again. Then it's EQ'd. You know, people make the joke about how like, oh, compressed 6 times. And like, no, you're just an incredible bad idea. But like, if you think about it, a lot of these sounds probably are compressed about that many times. Especially like these completed drum samples. Like, they're pretty much already that when you're doing it. And like some of these snares, like, were compressed, and then they were compressed again, and then they're compressed again, and then they're compressed in the drum bus, and then they're compressed in the master. So like they're compressed maybe 4 or 5 times. And some of these basses are compressed maybe 4 or 5 times. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a sound in this track that was compressed actually 6 times. So keep that in mind. This business, pretty sure that's just phase orb 19. Yeah. This is the phase orb with the opposite keyboard tracking, which may be the main one. Did I do that? Yeah, the main one's got the opposite keyboard tracking, so that's what that's going on. What that is. And we found that guy again, the vocoder, Harmer FM vocoding bass. I'm pretty sure that's this dude. Yep. So it just goes down way lower, and the pitch automates up as it goes lower. So it's a bit, it gets the sort of opposite world. We get this shape, which looks weird. This is probably also phase warp. Yep. Main phase warp. This is the MIDI that's creating that weirdness. That sounds gross. This is the main bass? Nope, still phase warp. Every time I think it's a different bass, it's still phase warp. Let's just denote there's no automation or anything going on. So this is the vocoder bass coming in, and it starts on with the FM modulation all the way off, which basically means it's being modulated by a sine wave. Like the vocoding is being modulated by a sine wave, which gives you pretty much nothing, and we just hear the bass. And it creeps on slightly. We get the piano hit. This is probably still phase warp. Yep. So this is interesting because it's the layer bass that's rhythmic, except I cut off each individual beat, so it hits a bit harder. And I do the same thing for the happening there. As you see here, I turned out it has this limiting threshold on the sidechain. I upped it a little bit while that was happening because, again, this is the kick drum that's hitting 4 times, and I wanted it to not kill the sound completely, because it would if I didn't get rid of this. That's what it would sound like versus. So this is a sound that I use twice. I use it here, and I use it in the same place in the second drop. I only ever use it for that. And this is actually a layer bass, which is lucky for you because it's made out of the filter basses I was talking about. So what these guys are basses that were made with pretty extreme filter qualities. And let's see, this first guy, it's got a custom shape, and this is the shape that's created. And a whole lot of resonance with the pedestal shape, which is a preset shape that you could use. Pedestal, pedestal. I set the width pretty high, keyboard tracking is off. All this good stuff. There's a little bit of unison, which is being automated off, just to change the phase of the whole sound a bit. And Prism, same deal. Harmonic use and pitch is a bit weird, which doesn't really particularly matter that much because it's being automated off a little bit, fast. Being automated with, or being distorted with hill, and then I also changed the local EQ a little bit. I got rid of a lot of the low mids. Here's a good example of what a not keyboard tracking thing does. Notice how the filter basically stays in the same spot versus following the note. And then that's that guy. And number 2. Mostly the same, just with different unison, different phase settings, different automation speed. Largely still the same. Did they give this guy its own? I did not. So these are all going in the same channel. Yeah. So this is the patcher that I'm using to process this. I'm not totally sure why I have 2 layers of EQ going in here into compressor into choruses. Actually, I think I do because I wanted to have layered choruses, but I didn't want the low end to go into the same chorus twice. So I had just a high end chorus going to distortion. Pretty much one distortion is a little crazier than the other one. Which one's the high end one? So this is the high frequency one. So the high frequency one gets the weird compressor or the weird wave shaper, which we can't even hear because that was not loud enough. We can hear it all. Okay, so that's what I did, but I turned it off because apparently it sucked. Yeah, so this guy's not making any sound at all. That's fantastic. So this is a more regular wave shaper. It's distorting it a little bit. And I also have the main signal going just right past it. So this is basically layering distorted chorus on top of not distorted chorus. This is what this guy does. Being low end and a little bit high end. And then it's all being compressed together. And distorted with the saturation. And then it goes out. It's got a little EQ. Going into sidechain. So you might be wondering, why did I have a post EQ not in the patcher? And why didn't I do that before the compressor, have it in there involved? And that's because this EQ, this particular kind of EQ that I did, was not a decision I made while I was making the sound. It's a decision I made while I was mixing it with the rest of the song. And I'm like, okay, this sound needs to have less of this and less of that. And so I just I slap an EQ onto the mixer insert and I make those changes. And then those changes are made. And now that's the sound. It's not a decision I made while I was making the sound. I had no idea that I wanted to do whatever it is I did here. I did that as a result of necessary changes on top of everything else that's happening in the track. It doesn't sound like it, but it's the same exact pattern and automation as this time it happens the second time. It's a little bit unnoticeable because there's drums. And as a result of there being drums, there's side chaining being applied to it, which means that the rhythm is going to be necessarily changed. So that's a handy way of being efficient about creating rhythm. So this guy, I use them only during the second drops. This is Reese 2. This is a preset that I made in here called Reese 2 out of Reese 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This was a saw wave with unison, and I did not change the unison pitch at all. And then I put the hill distortion on it and the chorus. I put the chorus before distortion. Yes, I did, because it turns out in the advanced tab, you can actually change the unit order and the effects order. The unit order are all the additive processes. So if you want to have, say, a harmonizer after the filter, it will do interesting things because the filter, cuts the sound, and then the harmonizer doesn't just play 2 notes twice, like the note twice. It copies harmonics and pastes it higher. So if you filter it all off, you'll see harmonics kind of just remain on top of it because it'll change how the harmonizer interprets the sound. So that's what that's one example of how the unit order can be interesting. The effects order is pretty straightforward. I put the chorus before distortion because I wanted the pitch difference to be the thing that is distorted. The reason why I did this like this, I didn't do any kind of like use the pitch changes, is because this is how Reese's used to be made. What is that modifier X modifying? Not a single thing. I have the prism on, which is what's causing this amount of like, because if I didn't have it on. Versus, yeah, so tiniest bit of that is what's causing that. And that's pretty much it for this sound. And I use it only during the second drop. So that was actually the rhythmic business there, except that I automated the phaser width of every single one of these. Or maybe that was the speed. No, it was the width. And I automated the width, and it did this to every one of them. And this is the first drop, yeah. And I'll do that again later. So that interesting bit of rhythmic change is the result of automating the phaser width, which changes the speed of things. I'm being called, but I cannot answer that at the moment. That was the phase where we got, and then this is the D&B bass. Pitch shifted down to fit the timing because it didn't when I did it originally. Yeah, so nothing new in this part. This is that main bass again. So this is what I mentioned earlier about the chorus that I'm automating on top of that. As the chorus is being on there, just to give it a bit more change. And I'm also automating the prism amount of that bass. This guy. Which further screws with how the higher harmonics are interpreted, just to be interesting. And it's worth noting that this part I muted the hats. So this is the silence portion where I did in the first drop, where I had the vocoder bass with the FM all the way off, which gave us just a sine wave. So I basically only focus on this sound. Oh, I get it. It's the reverse of this guy. Yeah, so I had the same sample, and then I reversed it, which magically makes it sound like a new variation because it's varied. It varies. It's varied. That's what's up with that. Most of this is just dicking around with what was originally in the other drop, just making it sound more new, like that. Like this is the same automation, the same pattern, the same automation type, in the sense that it happens all on the one beat, but the automation is different. And this is, remember, this is pitch more or less. Like the bass is actually staying in the same pitch, but because all the harmonics are moving around our brains, hear it as different pitches. So that's why that's a bit interesting. Something else I pointed this out during the other tutorial, but I want to talk about it again anyway. Like that particular weird rhythm on the bass is purely just the result of going really, really low. Which I find interesting. And then we have the second drop again, and this sound. Like that part that you're hearing is just the main layer bass higher. That's the rhythmic bass, again, the rhythmic layer with the phase width change. and then piano outro. That is basically everything in this track. And by basically, I mean 100% everything in this track. Unless I completely forgot something, which I don't think I did. That concludes this. If you have any questions about anything that I missed, or if I didn't discuss enough in depth, let me know, and I will attempt to answer it for you in the comments and stuff like that. I don't want to miss things. I don't want people to have thought that I did not cover what I should have. So then, yes, if you have any questions, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.